Actually, not a joke.
Hey guys, we're here with Pascal Wagner, CEO of Walkthrough, a zero-G capital portfolio company. I'll let Pascal talk a little bit about the company here in a minute, but first, a personal background introduction. So Pascal moved to the United States at 5 years old from Germany, where he was born. He then continued to go back to Germany, where he got his first IT digital marketing job at a firm called Timeline ERP, which is a SaaS company based in Germany. He then came back to the United States, got dual degrees in IT and information systems from Florida State University, and then started in 2013 his own digital consulting advertising company. He then sold that company in 2016 and then launched Walkthrough. Pascal, tell us a little bit about Walkthrough and what you guys do.
Cool. So thank you for the introduction, Mike. So Walkthrough is a marketplace platform where whether you're selling your home or you're a real estate agent, you can come onto the platform and order all of the services that you need in order to market a property to sell it. Today we start out with photography. Tomorrow could be cleaning, staging, contractors, the whole nine of anything that you need to market that property.
How did you come up with this idea?
So the original idea was virtual reality. So my best friend called me one night. He's a real estate agent, and he said, I'm driving back 40 minutes one way from a showing. Do you have time to talk? At that moment, I instantly realized you shouldn't be driving 40 minutes one way for a client just to peek into a home. You could do that with VR. And then the idea was, how do you get all of the homes in your database that people can look at? And that's how we started this photography company, where we would start doing 3D scanning at the same time as photography. We kind of found out that we're very early in the VR cycle, if that even happens at all. But we realized how big of a business just the photography piece is.
So you started with VR, and you worked on that, and at some point you decided VR is cool, but maybe not a business.
Right.
Talk to us about that transition.
So we did a lot of different tests over the last 2 years. Essentially what happened was we would run different experiments, like we got headsets shipped from China that aren't even available in the US yet. We had to figure out how to translate the headsets from Chinese into English and then load our own programs onto there, where we would then ship these headsets to people in other states that were looking at properties within Denver. So they would say, hey, we want to tour 123 Main Street. We would go out and scan it and upload it to kind of like the cloud where they could access it, and then tour that house, literally walk around, look under tables, flick on light switches. I definitely think that there is a possibility for this to have a place in the future where consumers hop on their phone and can tour places like that once everyone's phones are good enough and the data speeds are good enough. But right now, it makes sense to grow the photography portion.
How did you end up with photography? Start with VR. I mean, I guess they're tied, but where was this deciding moment that we're going to do photography?
So there's two defining moments. One was at the very beginning of the company, when we would ask all of the real estate agents, hey, how are you going to get all of the homes into your database that everyone can look at in VR? Mm-hmm. And then we started bouncing around different ideas, and that's when we came up with, wow, real estate agents are already paying photographers to go into the home and shoot the home and get that data. Mm-hmm. Why don't we just scan it at the same time in 3D? And we'll become this economies of scale play where we'll bring down the cost of photography and all the assets that are generated with that, and basically have a lot of innovation in the photography space so that we could reach the margins and the scale that we needed to for VR. The second piece then was several months ago throughout Techstars, when we kept running these experiments. So for example, the shipping of the headset to someone's house. As I started then approaching different VC firms, I would start out with like, hey, here are all the learnings, here's the traction we have with VR, and every single one of them would revert back to, hey, tell me about your traction and the revenue with your photography business. And
the VCs saw something.
Yeah, and so at a certain point, we just realized, like, look, we're not making as much traction as we'd like to in the VR space, and all the VCs keep asking about, well, what about this photography piece? Ultimately, we decided, like, look, we need to put all our eggs in this basket, and that's how we continue
Into
down
photography.
So before we dive deeper into the company and kind of tell the war stories of fundraising, which are always fun, let's talk a little bit more about you. Let's get to know you a little bit better. Did you always know you were going to be an entrepreneur? Did your parents suspect it?
They knew it as soon as he was born.
You guys love this question. So my parents had basically, since I was 5, had always told me, like, be your own boss, go for it. And I've always had that instilled in the back of my mind. And then whenever I wanted to go to the movies or have my first cell phone, it was like, how are you going to work to get the money to buy those?
Mm-hmm.
And so that's when I picked up my first job at the grocery store and cleaned sailboats.
So you graduated college, two degrees as we talked about, and then instead of going and getting kind of an entry-level job, you decide to start your own company. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in college, all of my friends were going to grad school, and I'd tried doing a couple different startups and tried building a couple different businesses, some that were successful, some that were not. I sold candy like no one else, at the high school gym. I was trying to figure out, okay, I could spend $200K and get an MBA at a top-level university. From there, either have to try and figure out how to pay off that debt.
It's a lot of candy.
It's a lot of
That's
candy.
a lot of candy.
Yeah.
Right, and then you're kind of you have golden handcuffs, right? Like, you have to take a job in order to pay off all that debt. And instead, I convinced my parents to allow me to use the money that they'd saved for college. I got a whole bunch of scholarships in college. I actually got paid to go to college. I got $8,000 on top of tuition.
Got a whiz kid.
Yeah,
Right.
I figured out the system of how to get scholarships. And so they basically said, look, here's $30K that we saved for college for you.
Mm-hmm.
And I convinced them to let me live off of that for basically the next 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
is what I extended that runway to. So I was a part of this online community called The Foundation, where I kind of learned most of the basics that are fundamental to what I know today. And I basically moved into this entrepreneur house here in Colorado because that's where the founders of the foundation lived, and I wanted to be closer to other people actually trying to build businesses. Kind of surround yourself with other people trying to do the same thing.
You found some strangers online and
Yeah, literally.
Okay. And is that what brought you to Colorado?
That's literally what brought me to Colorado.
Okay.
So
All right.
I was part of this online community.
Very compelling.
Met these people online. We've been to back and forth for a couple months. We talk on Google Hangouts daily, trying to figure out how to solve problems and talk to customers and figure out solutions. And after that point, I started picking up freelance gigs online and tried to figure out any which way I could pay the bills. So essentially, I basically took the next 2 years and I went on to websites like Upwork and took on projects while calling customers daily, trying to figure out what problem to solve, what solution to build, and that's how I got my start.
So let's talk about the round. So give us the background on your fundraising process. I know when you and I had kind of connected about it, you were struggling with, you'd gone out, you'd raised capital at what is probably a too high valuation, and I think it'd be really insightful for our viewers to hear kind of how that worked out and the learnings you had from that.
Totally. So back in November
2017,
and even slightly before then, maybe July 2017, we went out to start and raise a round for Walkthrough. One of the groups that we kind of were working with in order to raise that capital, we pinned it all at an $8 million valuation.
And how did you arrive at $80 million?
It's we compared how the company was performing against other companies in the space.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, Zillow, Matterport, name a bunch of different real estate companies. and what valuation they raised their seed round at, and how much revenue they had generated up to that point.
Mm-hmm.
So you almost worked backwards using unicorns as an example.
A little bit of selection bias, if I have one.
Sure.
Yeah.
But then using you didn't know they were going to be a unicorn when they were a seed stage company.
Sure.
Right? And so basically using that as a way to formulate a valuation.
Sure.
And, back at the seed stage, they were raising at 50, 100, 140x revenue valuations.
Mm-hmm.
And we were raising, in comparison, a 20x valuation.
Why do you think they could do it at that price? Was it just timing?
So I think there are a lot of different factors. I think there's timing. I think it's pre-existing relationships. I think it's you have different factors. So for example, if you compare Facebook, where they were when they raised their seed round, they had 0 revenue, right? They had an infinite multiple on
Mm-hmm.
revenue. So there are other metrics at play other than revenue that go into that equation.
Yeah, when I think about I don't know about Matterport, but I know that Zillow was started really by 2 or 3 industry veterans, right? Long
Also
track
true.
record of
Yeah.
success, I think.
But the true test of evaluation, obviously, is the market.
Right.
Yeah.
And you went out to market.
Right, and so what ended up happening is we had a bunch of people who kind of said that they were interested and they wanted to have a lead come in and put down a term sheet and lead the round. And so that's where we got stuck is one, I didn't know enough about leads versus follow firms.
Talk to us about it. What's the difference in your view?
Yeah, so very much I've learned that I go onto Crunchbase now and I look up how many investments has this firm done in the last year, in what space have they done those investments. So for example, they might say that they're doing real estate and marketplaces, but if in the last 2 years they haven't done a single real estate or marketplace deal, that's that's signaling a yellow flag. I probably should not waste my time on them unless they're serious about
what's
that space.
Educate our audience. What's the difference between a follow-on investor
Right.
versus a lead investor?
So then on that same Crunchbase profile, along with noticing those pieces of information, it says, did that investor lead the round or not?
Mm-hmm.
And so basically what a lead means is they're the ones that are coming to the table regardless of if you have other people interested and willing to give you a term sheet and say, I think the company's value is $5 million, we're willing to put in $500K.
Regardless of what other people
do. Back then, I didn't know that, and we just had a bunch of people who were kind of followers, who were either mentioning they were interested and not actually interested, or they were true followers and they were waiting for a lead.
On our end, there is a lot of work associated with being a lead. And as the lead, we're negotiating not only on our behalf, but on behalf of all investors in that round.
Right.
So the follow-on investors are really saying, we don't want to do that work. We want to throw some capital in, but we don't think we can set the price, do the proper diligence, and really execute on doing a deal here.
Right. And there's pros and cons to, I'd imagine for you, on your side of being a lead versus not a lead. And in our case, I've now learned that I need to focus on getting the leads first and
Mm-hmm.
then following up with all of the follow-on firms instead of the other way around. And
Sure.
it changes the psychology and the dynamic in the fundraise from the company's perspective.
So you went out to market, and you're having a hard time finding leads. And do you think that was because of the valuation?
So I want to get one point clarified. Did you have, so you're saying you had follow-on investors that are saying, we're going to invest, but you got to find a lead, or were you not gaining traction with either?
I had follow-on investors that were like, look, if you find a lead, I'd follow on.
Okay.
But you're never sure.
But you're never sure, right?
You're never sure.
Right.
Because they're not signing a document.
No.
It's just a verbal,
Exactly.
we'll do it if you find a lead.
Right.
Okay.
And we've done several, calls. We've been on 4 calls with these people, a couple different funds. But I would say, yeah, very much it was couldn't get the lead together, and then you lose momentum, right? It was November, Thanksgiving happens, people are away with their families, and basically between Thanksgiving and Christmas, no one's doing anything.
Sure.
And then everything picks back up in the new year.
So what's kind of the trade-off? A lot of people may have not done a funding run themselves, but there's a tremendous amount of work associated with doing a funding round, and obviously the business still has to operate and grow at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, fundraising is a huge distraction to the business. If you don't have enough of headquarters people in place to
How did
run
you
it.
deal with the distraction?
We had team members. I mean, basically, I wasn't helping on day-to-day, making sure the right things were in place, like that we were focusing on revenue-generating activities. Like, at some point, you have to trust that your team is making the right decisions, which is great. It's what you should be doing, but also, you're lacking one of the key founders in the business that has the vision, probably different insights or skill sets than the other people you've hired.
Yeah, you're not able to hustle on the business, essentially.
Right.
So what advice would you give to entrepreneurs that are trying to figure out what valuation they should go to market at?
Yeah, so I don't think it's actually you setting the valuation. I think from the company's perspective, it's you finding a lead investor and getting them to give you a valuation. And so really going in and figuring out, okay, these are leads and these are follows. I'm only going to focus on leads first. And then the whole point is how can I get multiple leads to give you a term sheet so you can pin them against each other. So an example might be I might have a term sheet from ABC Fund and they value the company at $4 million, and I have another company that's XYZ Fund that also values the company at $4 million, but now I go back to both of the funds and I say, look, I really want to work with you. I have another term sheet on the table, and I'm just trying to figure out who I should work with.
Sure, so it's the dance.
And it's the dance. And so that's how the negotiations happen. And it might be like, look, I really love to work with you, but I think the valuation's too low. And you only really get leverage if you have multiple firms competing to lead the round.
So we just closed our investment in Pascal's company, and there was a process associated with that. Talk to us about your perspective of the process.
Yeah, so I very much only focused on leads this time, which later, I wouldn't say it came to bite me, but I wish I similarly approached as many follow firms, because every lead investor wants to have a seat at the board table, and they need to have a certain percentage of the company in order for it to make sense for them. And we ended up having like kind of co-leads or two leads where they both wanted board seats, so I had to give up an extra seat on the board, 2 extra seats actually, and instead of finding follow-on investors and bringing them on. It's a delicate dance because I received a term sheet from you guys, and I also was talking to Birchmere at the same time, but I had started the conversation again with them several weeks later. I'd known them for over a year, but in the ideal scenario, I would have had a term sheet from you guys and a term sheet from Birchmere and been able to pin them. But because of schedules, I wasn't able to engage with Birchmere soon enough. And I was very transparent with them that I'm working with 0G and that I'm likely to get a term sheet there, and it would have it took them a lot longer to get on board because I started the process later with them.
We had some interactions for the viewers where we're going to sign the docs, and there's this process where the lawyers are interacting with each other, correct?
Totally, yeah.
And there's always different perspectives on if something's taking a long time versus not a long time. But talk to us a little about your perspective, kind of when you took a step back, right?
Totally. So as we were kind of negotiating through the process, when a company is, this probably happens more frequently in the seed stage than any other stage, but we are basically in this position where money is teetering in the bank, where you have like 10 or 20K left, and
down to your last
dollars.
Yeah.
And kind of every day that it takes to negotiate that contract is another day that you can't hire someone, is another day that you can't start moving forward on progress, right? And so I'd imagine that in later stages, you either have the experience or you start fundraising earlier, and you're still able to continue making progress. But on our side, it's felt that we haven't been able to make as much progress because we didn't have the cash to have the right people in place to continue while the negotiations and the deal is closing.
Yeah. Unfavorable pressure
right.
to you when negotiating a deal.
Right.
This is why, at Zero G, we always encourage companies to overraise, because you don't want to be in that position where you're running out of cash and trying to get cash at the same time and raise and manage the business and all those things.
Totally.
So are we recommending to our viewers that they shop around all their term sheets?
Pascal is recommending that he would like to do that for all his future deals.
Yeah. So Pascal, you're doing this dance, you're approaching a dance partner, and then
is that what you call him, dance partner?
Yeah, and you tell this dance partner, hey, I really want to dance with you, but there's this other dance partner, and I think I might dance with them. How do you think they react?
Obviously, that is less favorable for you guys, right? To me, on that side, I'm like, I hit the sweet spot.
Yeah.
How does it feel on your end?
I
imagine there's some level of expectation that could happen.
There is some level of expectation that would happen. I think VCs take measures to prevent that from happening, right?
Right. They say, like, hey, here's my offer. You have, 4 days to sign it or not.
Yeah. Give me a response
Yeah.
or go screw around with some other dance partner, right?
Yeah.
That's one way of doing it. I think the risk is we have this clear line of communication. You're local. It's easy for us to work with you. But the risk is that the egos get in the way. And what if we don't have a clear line of communication? We're just like, wow, we've been working with this guy for months, and now he's just shopping us around. We thought we gave him a fair deal. So you could see how that might bite someone in the rear.
Totally, yeah. I think timing comes into play. Like, how long have you had the term sheet?
Yeah.
Right. Like, if you get them within a few days of each other,
of course,
way more reasonable than if it's like
you're
2
hanging
weeks
on for a couple weeks.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about the next stage, right? So you get term sheets, but that doesn't mean money in the bank, right?
Right.
And a lot of entrepreneurs don't understand that there's this process, both in deep dive due diligence, but also just, you and me talked about not even understanding that, hey, I got to provide all these reps and warranties for the deal to close, things like that. So talk to us about kind of your surprise moments where you thought, I've got term sheets, they're signed, I'm going to have money in the bank maybe way sooner than I thought I was going to have it.
Totally. So there were a couple surprises. One was the disclosure schedule. I feel like there should be checklists for companies to prepare all these things ahead of time.
So talk to the audience about what that is.
And so disclosures are things like all of the things that you should have provided within the due diligence period.
It's like a table of contents.
Like a table of contents. Like, hey, here's my employment agreement. Hey, here are all the contracts that we have. Here are the office leases we have. Here are maybe the contracts that we don't have from former employees. That was definitely not a huge, but that was like a surprise where things extended for another, several days.
Which, in the scheme of things,
is nothing, but when
started
you're under
fundraising a
pressure.
year ago. Yeah,
right.
exactly.
When you're low on cash,
when you're
once
low on
again,
cash, it feels
you're
like
very sensitive to every day,
Yeah.
which is another topic. Your timeline is not your lawyer's timeline
Exactly.
or your investor's timeline.
Exactly,
right?
yeah. The other surprise moment really was the learning that I had only approached leads and how much certain firms will only lead and not follow at all. And so very much people that I thought I had interested kind of in the bag were not, because it would mean that they would have to give up that board seat and they couldn't own a certain percentage of the company. So it was like, shit.
Was it more the board seat, or was it more just that they needed to deploy a certain amount of capital and they couldn't?
Both. I mean, for them, it's hey, one, we need to have deployed this much amount of capital for it to make sense for us. With that amount of capital, we usually sit on board seats.
Yeah, and or maybe their investors also require that they govern the companies that they invest in.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Well, Pascal Wagner, congratulations on your close. Thanks for being our guest.
Thanks
for being a portfolio company.